por esta aproximación a lo que será un diálogo a profundidad que tendremos a continuación para hacerle doble clic al tema de los minerales estratégicos para la transición energética. Y me place mucho tener la oportunidad de presentar en este momento a la persona que liderará esta conversación. Es la reconocida periodista Camila Zuluaga, para quien pido un aplauso, por favor.
Bueno, pues a todos muy buenos días. Ya oyeron ustedes la presentación magistral de Guillaume, entonces creo que es importante entrar en una conversación mucho más profunda. Y creo que para poner en contexto la conversación con él y por qué es importante, es que no se nos olvide que viene la COP16 y la vamos a tener en Cali. Y hay una agenda verde que se está discutiendo en estos momentos en el país y en el mundo. Y quizá Guillaume fue uno de los primeros, de verdad, de los primeros que empezó a investigar realmente qué tan verde es la transición energética, qué tan conveniente y qué tan buena con el planeta es esa transición energética. Y por eso pues vamos acá a hacer una especie de una entrevista en Spanglish, porque Guillaume habla y entiende español, pero prefiere hacer la entrevista en inglés. Así que yo, pues Guillaume, I want to start asking you, you were among one of the first people to highlight that the energy transition might not be as environmentally friendly as is commonly believed. What motivated you as a journalist to start this research?
Yo voy a hablar en inglés también. Well, this is a book that I've been working on for like 8 years, 6 to 8 years, which was published a couple of years ago. And I love to work on commodities. As a journalist, people are not very interested in geopolitics. They feel like it's very far away from their concerns. Unless you talk about a commodity in the world, tomato, oil, mining, that ends up in your phone or that ends up in your plate. And suddenly you say, oh my goodness, that's very interesting, because I'm not only a reader of that news, I'm a consumer of the product that is being investigated in that news. So you're not only a reader but a consumer, and suddenly you understand that you are a direct, there is a direct link between what's happening at the other end of the world and these commodities. And rare metals, critical metals, strategic metals came under my watch probably back in 2010. And at the time, no one talked about it. No one didn't care about it. But all the mining world, and you knew, and we knew in France, that this was the next huge thing coming, and that we were talking about everything about the green world, but not this specific thing. And I was just like, I just can't let this huge, thing going on. So I'm going to write a book, and I'm going to have probably 1,000 copies sold, half being sold by my mother, and the rest will be sold, I don't know where. And I will have 2 media interviews, and no one will care about it, and it will be forgotten. And here I am speaking to you.
And given that almost nobody was talking about that specific subject, how has your research been received, given that the prevailing narrative currently emphasizes the necessity of advancing the energy transition?
When we talk to the mining world about that, people tend to agree. Yes, we need metals for the energy transition, and we're shifting dependencies. But when you're not in that world, you just don't know it. And that was received, that message 5 years ago, 6 years ago, with a huge shock. And people were excited, interested, but the message was very, and still, in a way, very provocative, because green is not green. If you want to be green in your car, someone has to pay the price for you to be green. That's just true, in my view. And so people were also shocked. And so I made many friends, and I had also many enemies, especially, I guess, in the electric vehicle business. Cars in Europe is a huge business, 40 million jobs, especially in France. So, I didn't make only friends. But, I think progressively we could speak to each other.
Okay, but now you talked about geopolitics. So I wanted to ask you, in what ways has the evolving geopolitical landscape influenced the perspective on your research and related topics? And when I'm talking about geopolitics, I'm talking about the war in Ukraine, for example.
Yeah, I think the recent, like the last 3 years, geopolitical context has completely changed our stance on these questions. And obviously, COVID played a huge role because when COVID started, you remember that we had no masks. and we had to wait for the Chinese to deliver masks. We had no paracetamol, and we discovered that the Chinese are actually producing paracetamol. So all these questions regarding our dependency of our foreign supplies, for such as things are masks, actually this debate came upon the strategic resources for the IT and for the energy transition, the metals. And suddenly our mindset has changed. The war in Ukraine has changed our perception about how reliable we can be towards the exterior world. We wanted to be reliant over Russian gas? Well, maybe we might not have to be. So the era of happy globalization, of the invisible ends of the markets, where basically I can trust the market to provide me any material I want because I will just be able to put the price on it. This era is progressively changing and it's shifting the way we think and the way we think and we look at globalization as an opportunity to bring us a lot of goods, but also here comes diplomacy, geopolitics, economic wars and trade wars and tensions, where it tells us you have to have like a more sovereign approach to your industry. And that has completely changed the mindset in Europe over this question over strategic resources. And for the last 2 to 3 years, Europe is now much more open to this question of where are we going to get the cobalt from? Where are we going to get the lithium from? And now we see French ministers and European ministers rushing to Latin America to say, hey, how can we trade something together? How can we make a trade deal? Because we have changed our way to look at the world.
Okay, so now let's come to Latin America. And in this landscape that you're explaining in the world right now, what is the position of Latin America in the context of rare metals that are actually your expertise? Are there opportunities for the continent, for the region, and what strategies can be employed to avoid being left behind, for example, against China and Africa?
Well, there are so many opportunities, obviously. As you know, I might not repeat maybe what you already know, but Latin America holds one of the most tremendous reserves of copper, Chilean copper, Peruvian copper, Colombian copper, nickel, Colombian nickel, but also rare earths. Brazil is the third largest reserve of rare earths. Cobalt, Cuba has cobalt. And I could multiply this example. So the potential is absolutely huge. We see more Latin America on the map from a buying country's perspective and from a Western country's perspective. I don't think we have as much talked about mining resources of Latin America as we ever did in the past. And now lithium and copper and nickel and cobalt are very much on the watch. That being said, obviously, in my view, this is very much about Chile. Because of the Chilean copper, because of the lithium, of the Chilean copper lithium. It's much more about Mexico. It's much more about Argentina. It's much more about Brazil. Brazil has niobium, which is such an important metal for the nuclear energy power plants. But not that much about Colombia. Colombia is quite, sorry to say so, but I'm talking from my European Western country consuming side perspective. We don't see that much Colombia here under our watch. There is this mineral security partnership, which is a US-led diplomacy initiative to bring around the table producing and consuming countries around common standards of production of metals to avoid a race to the bottom. There was no Latin American countries in this initiative, which is very strategic, until Argentina just joined this initiative just this month in August. But there is no Colombia here. And I think it's partly due to the fact that, for the many various answers that I've given, but also to the fact that we need to have a better understanding of the underground of Colombia. It's untapped reserves, but I think we just don't even know what we don't know about the reserves and the potential of Colombia. We don't know anything about France anyway. We have at our last survey, geological survey, back in 1992 in France. And now the president just said, we're going to make a new geological survey because we just don't know anything, and there is no money to make the survey in France. So relax. But still, I mean, it's such an unknown world, underground world, that still needs to be known in order to see all the potential. And this is something which still needs to be done.
But if Colombia is being left behind for what you just said, because Latin America is in the landscape because of Chile, Brazil, Mexico, and Peru maybe, but not because of Colombia, how can we position ourselves to be at the forefront of the resources essential for the energy transition? Because we have a government right now that has a green agenda and is working on the energy transition. And you said, and in your research, that we need rare metals to make this energy transition to be a reality. So what we should do?
Sure. I tried to answer by saying what would be a renewed approach of competitivity, taking into account what competitivity means in the eyes of consumers today, what they expect from the market. It's just not only about money. It's about fair trade, it's about ESG standards, it's about reliability of supplies, it's about transparency, it's about all that. Transparency is important, and I would insist a bit on transparency. Transparency, what does it mean in the mining? For the consumer to be willing to discuss with you because he needs transparency. Transparency of communication in the mining process. Transparency of decision-making with local communities because you have no choice anymore. And transparency of profit-making and profit-sharing. This is a key takeaways from the mining side. And eventually, transparency for the downstream value chain until the product ends up in the hands of the final consumer. Transparency means trust. I would probably also insist upon one other thing, which in my view is important. Regulations is necessary, and we have to have regulations. Because once again, how do you pride yourself for welcoming the COP16 in Cali anytime soon while saying, I'm going to be competitive? This is such a difficult question. Regulations have to be here, but the problem is, in my view, less regulations than certainty. Certainty in regulatory and tax environments, and stability in the vision about it. And this is where probably lots of things need to be stabilized, because I know how uncertain the situation can be today. One last thing is, we are looking up to today at what we need in terms of metals, but chemistry is changing so much. Look at the chemistry of batteries for electric cars. 2 or 3 years ago, we were just talking about nickel, cobalt, manganese batteries for electric cars. And today, 30% of electric cars in the world are being made with another chemistry for batteries, which is lithium, iron, and phosphates. Well, no need for cobalt, no need for nickel, but there is a new need for iron and phosphates. And guess what Colombia has? Iron and phosphates. So how do you position yourself with a dynamic approach of the future by saying, I can leapfrog, I can have a look at the new chemistries coming ahead, and how do I position myself 10 years, 20 years ahead on this very much evolving market of changing needs for the energy transition, because the energy transition will be based on diversity of metals, which we don't even know right now. And the substitutes of today are the criticalities of tomorrow. The substitutes of today are the criticality of tomorrow. How do you position yourself on the criticalities of tomorrow by having a dynamic approach to the future need of humankind? Iron, phosphates, why not?
Every economic sector, you were talking about regulation, and this doesn't happen only in Colombia, it happens in many countries, that the economic sectors are reluctant to regulation. But why regulation is important and can be an advantage in the Western market, in Europe?
Oh, that's just what I tried to explain during my speech. Once again, the regulatory environment is not huge on your hand, it's huge on the consumer's hand. And my message is really here. We can't buy the metals today, and we won't buy the metals as we used to buy them. And this is what I keep saying to the companies. And this is what the companies keep telling me. Aerospace companies, luxury companies, whatever kind of industry companies in Europe, they have understood that. So they're ready to pay a bit more as long as they have stability of supplies and as long as they don't have a judiciary process on their back because some kind of children were working in the mine, in the upstream chain, and then discover it because of a media investigation led by the Washington Post. They don't want that. And this is really where I see how can you answer to these needs and how can you be competitive in this respect. Have a larger understanding, a larger approach of what competitive is all about. This definition will be in the future much more complex than what it is today. And we won't make business in the future on that end as we've been doing it. I see it happening right now in consuming countries.
I began this conversation telling the audience that we will have the COP16 in October being held in Cali. And one of the key issues that is going to be discussed is that and how Colombia and Latin America can use its biodiversity and resources effectively. How can the country ensure that it retains value for its rare metals that we are discussing right now, rather than just simply exporting them when we encounter? What strategies should we consider for negotiating those resources transfers?
It's such a huge issue, and it's a worldwide issue. Basically, China has opened that game 25 years ago by saying, I stop exporting my rare, critical, strategic metals, and I will move down the value chain, and at the end of the process, I will be selling batteries. I will be selling the metals, but with inside the batteries with a much better added value. And now we have this huge worldwide phenomenon of what we call resource nationalism, which is just taking shape. And countries understand that they could be the winners of the energy transition, but not if they sell the metals, if they sell the finished products. And this is a real issue now. And as The Economist, the British newspaper, said it once, it said countries don't want to become mining states. They want to become electro-states. And you guys in Colombia want to become a mining state, but you want to become an electro-state. You want to sell the finished product. And that implies moving down the value chain. This is exactly what eco-minerales is all about. However imperfect eco-minerals might be, but this is the point of keeping the added value. And that's going to be a trade-off taking place in the future years between the consuming countries and the buying countries. A huge meeting took place in Paris last September. 180 countries around the world, I think there were 50 countries, sorry, ministries of energy, mining of all the world came to Paris at the OECD, and they discussed minerals. And around the table, the Europeans said, okay, we want your metal, we want your mineral, and we'll make it a metal because we're going to process it in France. And African countries, Australia, Latin Americans said, no way, guys. We want to process it on our end. So the trade-off which is going to take place is at what stage of the processing, of the transformation of the metal, will this balance of trade-off, this negotiation come up? Where will be the solution so that you keep the maximum added value of it? You don't want to repeat what happened during the 16th and 17th century. You want to keep the added value for yourself. We don't want green colonialism again, because if we don't change that, it's just green colonialism taking place. We're just painting it with green, but we don't change the real rules of the game. But for you guys, it's not only about claims. Many countries claim it. Indonesia, Mexico, Chile, China, Ghana, Zimbabwe. The question is, how do you make that happen? Because it's much more easy to get rich with oil than to get rich with metals. You get rich with oil, oh sure, you just, let the oil come out and you're rich. You don't get rich because you have just a mine of rare earths in your garden. You get rich if you are able to turn that metal into a finished product. But what about the human resources? What about the infrastructures? What about the roads to bring the metal from one side or one another of the country? What about the electricity networks? Because you need electricity to refine the metals for the electricity transition. All these questions we're looking 25 years ahead. We're looking at completely reshaping an industrial strategy of a country. And that has taken China 25 years. China has time. They could say, it doesn't matter if we don't, satisfy the needs of our population right now, because 25 years ahead we'll win. They have the time. I don't agree with that political regime, but at least they have the time. And it's a strategy that you're about to put in place, but that will take 25 years.
But then let's talk about the future, because we're talking about the green transition, the energy transition. What would you foresee as the future of the fossil fuel industry that actually, well, the representatives are here, within the context of the ongoing green transition that we're discussing right now and that the world is discussing?
I'll be very objective by sharing some facts and figures which are very much known. When we look at the scenario of the International Energy Agency, basically, if we do as we do right now in the business as usual scenario, we will consume in 2050 as much volumes of fossil fuels as today. The growing needs of electricity and energy will be supplied by green electricity, but the basics of our need will remain the same. So the electricity energy mix will get more diversified. In percentages, fossil fuel will represent a smaller share of the circle, but still, in terms of volumes, the volumes might be almost the same. And this is the reality of the transition as it goes right now. It's a transition where only what we need more, like our growing needs, are satisfied, but there is no substitution of the needs.
So we are not really in an energy transition. Can we name it that way, or do you think we should rename it?
I think we should rename it, and I don't think we are in an energy transition. I think we are in an energy addition. And over the history, we have seen former needs not being replaced by new needs when a new energy transition came, but being additions, a new needs coming as an addition to the former needs. When Brittany moved to coal in order to stop cutting trees, they've been consuming as many trees after the coal revolution because they needed the trees to fix the galleries into the coal mines. So the trees were being used in another way, but they were using as many trees. And coal came as an additional need. And today, if we keep in that direction, there is no energy transition. There is an energy addition taking place.
The time's up, but I have one last question for you, and I think it's very important for our audience. And it's, do you have any advice for the industry in Colombia on how to align with the green agenda while avoiding a conflict with the environmental goals?
That's such a ridge line, and once again, it's difficult. The Energy 2.0 chapter is how to make things green from the -1 to -7, from the mine to the recycling plant, and this is obviously going to be very difficult. My once again answer would be to. I would like to answer this way by talking about transparency, as I mentioned, and about trust. And it's not only about, sometimes I hear, oh, AI could help us. Yes, AI could help you, but AI will not help you in communication. AI will not help you in talking to local communities. AI will not help you for better counting the number of wells. Why not? But AI will not help in having a policy of being transparent on profit sharings. This is not where technology helps here. It's about human relationships. It's about trust, confidence, and transparency. It's a philosophical answer, but this is what I see the market needs.
I didn't ask you how you pronounce your name because I don't speak French. I speak English, but not French.
Well, you can say Guillermo, that's okay, but it's Guillaume.
Guillaume Pitron. Well, Guillaume, thank you very much for this conversation.
Gracias. Muchísimas gracias.
Y les recomiendo de verdad que busquen los libros de Guillaume Pitron, que estoy segura que para ustedes serán muy interesantes de leer porque son unas investigaciones acerca de esos metales raros que se están utilizando y que se necesitan en esta transición energética de la que tanto estamos hablando en Colombia en este momento y en el mundo. Mil gracias y un aplauso.
Gracias.